Does Tucker Carlson understand what Christian Zionism really is? Today we're going to discuss this. He had on his show Nathan Apffel, who's a person that goes around and tries to expose churches for corruption and all that. I think he does some good work. Some people would disagree. I think Nathan does some good work in what he's brought to light. I don't agree with everything. But when they got into the idea of Zionism, did Nathan represent what Zionism really is? Do you know what Zionism is? Because that is a word that is thrown around everywhere. I'm not going to be a person that's dying on a hill for a label. There's no label I need to die on. I feel like I need to die on. If Christian, I will die on that hill. Every other label you want to throw at everyone or people want to say, because a lot of times people don't even know what anything means. They're just infusing into whatever word what they want it to believe, what they want it to mean, and they believe that. But what Nathan said when he represented, he got into dispensationalism, and he says that's what it is. That's what it is.
And so dispensationalism is the 12 tribes of Israel still deserve this land. And so I don't know where we want to...
And don't need Jesus?
And don't need Jesus, no.
Okay, so that's leaving aside the land and what you do with the Levant and all that, and what the boundaries of that land are. I mean, these are all questions I tried to get answers from in my conversation with Mike Huckabee to no avail. But that's secondary as a theological matter to the core question, which is how do you get to heaven? How are you redeemed? And I think the New Testament could not make it clear. Jesus couldn't make it clear. Paul, the Jewish Pharisee, couldn't make it clearer. It's through Jesus. It's an exclusive claim. It's that or nothing.
Correct. And Jesus...
That's what it says, right? Am I missing something?
100%.
A chapter I don't know about?
Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets to the Father.
Okay, so then you have people just arrive out of nowhere 150 or 200 years ago, and they're like, well, actually, there's one group that doesn't need Jesus? Is that what they're saying?
Correct. And this goes
Where
back...
does that come from?
It comes back from pride, is where I'll take it. So there was only one church, and it's not the Roman Catholic Church. It's not the Orthodox Church. Those are great traditions. I respect those traditions.
I do too.
But there's only one church, and that's the Church of Christ. That's the body of Christ. And in 1054, you have the Great Schism, the original split.
Right.
Denominational split. Boom. Now you have Catholicism in the Vatican, and you have Orthodoxy. Well, today, there's over 40,000 denominations.
So everybody has an idea of what the truth is. Now, he's trying to get to the bottom of. I think there is he's trying to also put up a block. He doesn't want to sometimes hear what people are saying because he's sat down with a lot of people that embrace Christian Zionism who embrace that and have explained it to him, but he puts up a block. He puts out a stiff arm and says he doesn't want to hear it. And what Nathan says, he goes to dispensationalism. And what that is like that God has dispensations throughout human history, and he was working with the Jews at one time, and now we're in the church age, and the Jews are going to come back, and there's almost these two people groups. There's some truth in a lot of these things. I think a lot of Christians have mixed ideas of truth and error. If you think you have all truth in your head, you're probably not right. I think we should remain humble. I want to come to the truth. So, like when I listen to Tucker and what they're talking about, I want to glean from them as much as possible. But this idea of what Christian Zionism is, it's not dispensationalism. That's not the full totality of it. It's much simpler than that. It's that God has a people group and who he made a covenant with, which is the Jewish people who are Israel. These are terms, there's a lot of conflation that goes on there. But if we think that God is just this arbitrary God who's just going to change his mind and say one thing and do another, that's really not a good representation of what the Bible portrays that he is. He doesn't change. And if we want to say that God made all these promises to Israel, because we see them, it happened in the Old Testament, and then he gets to when Jesus comes, and he just throws them all out the window, that wouldn't be really good news to his primary audience, which is Jews, which are Israel. Because that's what Paul even says in the book of Romans. The gospel, it's been revealed to the Jew first, obviously, and then to the Gentile. But it would not be good news if God promised all these things to them, and then, forget all that, we got something completely new. There's so much mixture and error happening right here that God does not, he wants us there to remain a distinction. I think that's the conflation that happens. Gentiles want to grab all the promises of Israel and say that they're applied to Gentiles, and then Israel doesn't want to relinquish any of the promises and say that the Messiah came and that there's a greater fulfillment of all nations being included in God's community. And that's what the offense of the cross was. The offense of the cross was the inclusion of Gentiles. That's why Jews persecuted Paul from city to city and didn't want him spreading this message. And Nathan, he got into like the book of Romans, saying it just dismantles what this idea of that there being still any promises with Israel, or that there being a greater fulfillment for Israel. Whereas when we go to the New Testament, we need to understand the context that Paul is writing in, who he's writing to. He's writing primarily to Gentiles. He's writing primarily to Gentiles, and he's wanting them to not become Jewish. That's the big thing that's happening in the New Testament. And the Christian Zionism aspect of it is we understand that there is still promises that are there for Israel to be had, and God's not done with them. And things that he said that would come about just because things look like that Joshua led them into the promised land, or David set up the empire, the kingdom, that was fulfilled. And I mean, this idea of fulfillment and being abolished is very, very conflated with a lot of people. They think that if something is fulfilled, that means it's done away with. It doesn't need to continue on. It's fulfilled. It's done. Whereas it's just carrying out. If President Trump wants to fulfill the Constitution, he's carrying out the law. He's doing what the Constitution says. But that doesn't mean the Constitution is done away with when he's fulfilling the law. When he's abiding by what the Constitution puts on him as a president. And that's what Jesus did. He fulfilled it. He completed it to its fullness. He did it exactly perfectly, but it doesn't wipe it away. And this is where the people that come into this, there's such confusion, and what Tucker is struggling with, and what even like this saying that it's just dispensationalism. That's not the whole story. It's not that. I understand that what John Nelson Darby in the 18th century, he created this idea or whatever, and he went on this offshoot. I think there's a lot of truth and a lot of people in the history of the church, like Martin Luther, but a lot of people don't have the fullness of it. If we want the fullness of truth, we need to go, what did the apostles believe? And what did Jesus teach? And it like this idea of God promises everything to this nation, and then Jesus comes. I mean, and just to think about it, they did not have the New Testament when Paul and the apostles were living there. All the scriptures were what we call the Old Testament. That was it. And then as time went on, the writings of the apostles were brought together and put into one book, into one like complete library of books. So what they were talking about with the Jews, their promises that were given to them, it would not be good news at all if we say the Messiah came and everything, your uniqueness, your special, the covenant that God made with you, it's done away with. Where would your hope as a Christian be? What would you be resting in is if that is your God, that he can just change his mind so in a moment and say, well, I promised you heaven. I promised you would be with me for eternity. But really, there's a greater people that you're just kind of like the stepping stone to the greater people that I have. You're kind of old news. You're a relic of the past. I just needed you for a little bit of period of time. Now you forget you. That's not what God is. That's not who he is. He doesn't go back on anything. The things get more revealed and get clearer. They don't get dimmer. And God doesn't just turn on what he says. And that's what's going on, like kind of with Christian Zionism. There's promises given to Israel that are to be had. And it's just basically who are the Jewish people? And it's if you're those people are abiding by what we call the Old Testament. They're trying to be faithful to it. Not everyone. I know there's a mixture of like people that are in error and that are probably worshiping Baal, probably worshiping a lot of things. That happens throughout the Old Testament. We see Jews that are like that. But it's not to throw out. God does not just change his mind. He doesn't. There's a greater fulfillment in Christ. It's not less fulfillment. But it's Gentiles we get to be included in this great redemptive story. All right. We'll leave it at that. Follow me on X and Instagram at Brandon Fogel. Smash that like button and drop a comment. Let me know what you think, and have a great day.